Hello everyone, and welcome to another video on Conservapedia, the place where American Christian conservatives go to LARP as academics. If you haven't seen the first video on their article covering Bernie Sanders, do check out my channel, but today we've got a spicy one. This is Conservapedia's article on Hollywood values. Now, conservatives not liking Hollywood is nothing new. There is a pattern of conservative actors and writers trying to break through in Hollywood only to realize they suck and end up doing political commentary instead. But besides that, there is a broad notion that Hollywood is predominantly liberal, but that really depends on who you ask. Like, the actors and writers? Sure, but the producers? Not so much. And while it is undeniable that Hollywood is by far the biggest influence on the movie and TV industry, pretty much everyone on every side of the political spectrum have some criticisms for it, such as the now overly saturated blockbuster genre that Marvel has become, or the terrible working conditions of everyone involved, or if you're on the right, wokeism, the practice of having actors of color and gay characters and they'll complain about it forever. Conservapedia, however, takes it in a slightly different direction and takes it a lot further. Hollywood values, also known today as Hollywoke or Hollyweird values, are characterized by spreading sexually transmitted diseases, public obscenities, decadence, narcissism, hypocrisy, rampant drug use, abortion, adultery, lawlessness, violence, and the promotion of the homosexual agenda and cultural Marxism. Okay, so once again, they're laying it all there in the very first sentence. So how do we even begin to process this? Well, let's put it this way. You know this notion back in the 90s when people started wondering if violent games like Mortal Kombat were making kids violent? Well, this entire article is pretty much the same thing, but with Hollywood. So if you watch violent movies, it'll make you violent. Movies with sex in it, you'll end up having sex, and if you see movies with drugs in them, you're gonna use drugs. Now, of course, much like the moral panic over video games from the 90s, the correlation between violent movies and people becoming more violent is flimsy at best. Now, to be fair, there have been studies showing that children and teenagers who either watch violent movies or play violent video games are a bit more likely to make higher risk decisions and are a bit more likely to exhibit aggressive behavior. So while the main claim isn't entirely based on nothing, Conservapedia still makes some obvious mistakes. For starters, movies that depict crime, sex, and drugs, those are not meant for children. We literally came up with a rating system to decide which movies are good for what audience. So while violent movies could have a negative impact on minors, if it's not meant for them, and the adults that it's meant for can discern between movies and real life, then where's the systemic harm here? And secondly, this premise also assumes that movies made in Hollywood are exclusively violence-oriented, which is obviously not true. If we acknowledge for a moment that Disney, Pixar, Sesame Street exist, and that they don't in fact promote decadence, then the entire premise falls apart. So when you go to the description section of the article, which lists some of the values that Hollywood presumably disrespects or disregards, such as the military, family, marriage, or commonly accepted behavioral boundaries and values of human decency, whatever that means, you basically have to ignore everything ever produced by Hollywood that does not fall within these descriptions. So yeah, broadly, that's what the article is about. It's about movies in Hollywood that challenge traditional values, which leads to a new generation of delinquents, which is not only one of the oldest moral panics in modern times, it's also pushed to the extreme, and it relies on basically ignoring everything else that Hollywood ever made, which includes a lot of productions made by conservatives, by the way, because those would just immediately dismantle the premise. Now, I do want to go over some parts of the articles, but as in my previous video, I'm not trying to debunk everything, because that would really take forever. I just want to go over some of the funny parts. So let's go to the first section, Hollywood as a tool of antisocial pedagogy. This section here is not only the argument that violent movies make people violent, but it's also the broader claim that the liberal elite ruling class made violent movies specifically with the purpose of making people violent. How did they come up with that? The article never says. It was important for the liberal ruling class to re-educate men of the past war generation by tempering him to a sort of barbarism, to the brutal and merciless imposition of his selfish interests, which necessarily implies a hypocritical attitude as the way to adapt to the social Darwinist struggle for existence. What on earth did I just read? So, after World War II, liberals wanted to re-educate people by, I guess, dehumanizing people in movies through some sort of barbarism? Let's continue. In the field of cinema, this kind of pedagogy necessarily produces movies that either openly preach banditry, gangsterism, and murder, or subtly place the individual in the social void, and cloud the sense of the real connection with society and its consciousness. The renunciation of pedagogy, in the best of cases, reduce young American children to a herd of lonely hysterics who end up following this wrong path, often to become gangsters. This is literally what I meant. Gangsters in movies create gangsters in real life. But the most frustrating thing here is the complete utter lack of examples. Okay, so you said there was a trend of liberals making movies that were violent and dehumanizing. Okay, fine. What movies are you talking about? You say libs were doing it on purpose to re-educate the post-war generation. Fine. What producers are you talking about? Now, to be clear, culture, art, politics, they all intertwine and always have. Throughout recent history, there have been movies that have been credited with pushing the boundaries of social norms. Some movies were considered very violent for the time, but they paved the way for more violent movies. Some movies were deemed too sexually graphic, but they paved the way for more erotic movies, for more sex scenes, for more nudity. So if Conservapedia wanted to make that kind of argument, that some of the values they don't like have been pushed in movies and then normalized, they could. Now, they would be stupid for calling it degeneracy and decadence, because for them, that's anything that's not Christian, but they could still try and substantiate it with concrete examples. So, do they show any? Is there any quotes? Any citations? The entire section has only 2 sources, 2 books to be exact, one called The Destruction of Reason, the other The Soviet Literature. Or at least I think that's it. I don't speak Italian, but it looks obvious. So, 2 sources, which are just 2 books, not a specific page, not a paragraph, or a section or quote, just the whole damn book. One over 800 pages, the other over 300, and in Italian. Nice! Great citations, Conservapedia. The funniest thing is both books are from the same author, George Lukács, who was, at times, a socialist, a Marxist, and a Stalinist. Think about this for a second. Conservapedia hates Hollywood so much that they cited a commie. And if you think that I'm gonna read 2 entire books to see if Conservapedia has the slightest hint of an informed argument, well, forget about it. Instead, I'm going to arrogantly assume that if those were the only 2 sources they had to substantiate their conspiracy theory, then they're just probably full of it. Especially since one of those books is literally on Soviet literature, so I don't know how American cinema would fit in there, but, you know, whatever. The next section is conflict over values, in which Conservapedia points out that some conservatives actually did fairly well in Hollywood despite all the degeneracy. They also point out that until the 70s, there were several strict moral codes held by film studios and television networks over what was deemed acceptable content, including couples on TV sleeping in separate beds and wearing pajamas. Now that's pretty funny, because it makes me wonder where the decadent liberal elite ruling class was when all those moral codes were being enforced. Can't they see the obvious contradiction here? How does that make sense? Then they briefly go over a few events that essentially liberated and decentralized the industry and allowed for more diverse content, which would gradually challenge social norms. The funniest part here is how they end up blaming The Simpsons for the failures of the Republican Party. Before The Simpsons premiered, Republican presidents had won 4 out of the last 5 American presidential elections. Afterwards, Bill Clinton won 2 elections back-to-back, the first Democrat to do so since FDR. I wish we had a source for that, but you know what? I'm down for it. If Biden isn't going to make himself likable, then maybe we should rely on The Simpsons to win the next election. Then there's the list of values we already went over, which again only makes sense if you ignore every movie that does in fact promote those values, so let's just pretend like John Wayne never existed. And that leaves us with the last hilarious and relevant section worth going over: celebrity deaths. Because if there's one thing Conservapedia tries to do here to really demonize Hollywood, it's trying to point out how these values by Hollywood are very deadly. This here is a list of 115 celebrities if I counted right, and probably the most extensive section in the article. And the only reason I won't go through every single deaths is because I am completely, utterly suspending disbelief here. I am letting Conservapedia strip every single death of all the necessary context to understand them. There are so many deaths here, from suicides, drug overdoses, or death from AIDS, or just sheer accidents, that are just brushed over with the single phenomenon of Hollywood values. So by their logic, none of these deaths could possibly be associated with other things like mental health, or the many recurrent problems that have been observed from people who become famous and just don't know how to handle all of the fame. But even accepting their completely ridiculous premise here, I can still find celebrities in the list that, even by their own definition of Hollywood values, have no business being there at all. Such as the death of Norton Calloway, an actor from Sesame Street. Quote, his mental health began a gradual decline due to the onset of bipolar disorder. He was institutionalized and, after a violent altercation with a hospital staff psychiatrist, suffered cardiac arrest induced by exhaustive psychosis after being restrained by police officers who had arrived at the scene, and was pronounced dead soon after. Well, you heard it from Conservapedia. Deteriorating mental health and bipolar disorder? Those are absolutely Hollywood values. Then they list Divine here, a drag queen performer who died of a heart attack. What one has to do with the other? Honestly, I have no idea. It is possible that if it wasn't for the Hollywood values that made this person a drag performer, they would have never had a heart attack, something that definitely never happens to anyone else. Yeah, that's some serious Hollywood values right there. Frances Farmer died of cancer from heavy smoking. Smoking, the thing that at some point in time, everyone was doing, everywhere. That's a Hollywood value right there. Okay. Margot Hemingway, 42, fashion model, actress, died via drug overdose. She had been sexually abused by her father as a child and later went through alcohol and drug addiction and depression as an adult, who had also posed nude in Playboy. Okay, so which part in there is Hollywood values? The part where she struggled with her mental health? Or was her father abusing her, the sexual value here? Or was posing nude for Playboy the Hollywood value that killed her? I'm not really sure, but I guess we'll leave it to Conservapedia to decide. Michael Jackson, 50, cardiac arrest from a toxic mixture and abuse of prescription drugs improperly prescribed by doctors. Okay, so did the Hollywood values cause the doctors to improperly prescribe medication? Or is the very act of taking prescribed medication an act of Hollywood degeneracy? They do the same thing here with my man Heath Ledger, saying his accidental combination of anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills was caused by Hollywood values. Last one, and this is a good one, this is Bruce Lee. Collapsed and died. Trace amounts of cannabis found in bloodstream at post-mortem. The official cause of death was acute cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, from hypersensitivity to aspirin. Cannabis probably didn't contribute to his death. Okay. If cannabis did not have anything to do with his death, why on earth are you bringing it up? It's well known that Bruce Lee died from taking an aspirin. What business do you have including him in this dumbass list? What even is this list? What even are Hollywood values at this point? Well, basically, it's anything Conservapedia doesn't like, and apparently they don't like aspirin either. It doesn't matter if the premise isn't substantiated, it doesn't matter if they'll quote Hungarian communists to back themselves up, and even through their list of what is supposedly deadly Hollywood values, they will literally just include anyone in there as long as they were in Hollywood, I guess. I think it goes without saying, but the only way you could ever take any of these articles seriously is if you pretend the rest of the internet doesn't exist. Every single thing that I googled to double check turned out to be completely false. That's just how Conservapedia is, and I guess that's just what Hollywood values are now. But anyway, there you have it, so thanks for watching everyone. It had been a while since I had done my last Conservapedia video, but after reading this, I feel like it hadn't been even remotely long enough. So when will the next video drop? Honestly, I have no idea, but tell you what, you have some articles from Conservapedia I should check out? Just let me know in the comments, and who knows, maybe in the future I'll risk my brain over it again. Anyway, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, you know the drill. I'll see you next time.